I would like to welcome everybody in this venue here today to this, I think it's an historic occasion where we are hosting Lord Micheal Cashman. Now, in South Africa, post-1994, we always welcome everybody in the venue or the room, and then we say all protocol observed. I have to tell you that when I met with Lord Cashman earlier, I said I had never hosted a Lord, so I don't know what protocol there is to observe and how to observe this protocol, because when Madiba also met the Queen, he said, "Hello, I'm Nelson," and she said, "Hello, I'm Elizabeth," and I told that story to him. So in South Africa, very often we don't know all the rules around protocol, but then Micheal, Lord Cashman said, "Just call me Micheal." So Lord Cashman, Micheal, welcome to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and specifically, we'd like to welcome you to the College of Humanities. This lecture that you are going to be doing in the EU Inspiring Thinkers series is part of the College of Humanities Transformation Lecture Series, which we started last year, and where key figures nationally and internationally and our postgraduate students contribute to the discourse on transformation locally and globally, specifically in higher education, but more importantly and broader to the issue of development. For me, it's important also at another level that we are hosting this seminar and today, or public lecture, in that it is our weekend where we are supposed to celebrate, and I believe at this point rather reflect on issues of human rights, given that the 21st of March is Human Rights Day in South Africa. And I do believe as a nation and as members of the higher education sector in South Africa and globally, we are indeed at a crossroads, as your lecture, I'm assuming, will talk to when you talk to Europe at the human rights crossroads. We have had a meeting with Lord Cashman and members from the EU, and I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the EU the member from the EU's office in Pretoria that is here with us today, and I thank you for that. I'd also like to thank Professor Matula and the school who is hosting it as part of the college, and all the deans that are here this morning. And I will hope that I haven't been not as that I observed a little bit of protocol and maybe took 2 or 3 minutes. I found it very interesting that you spoke about short people and dictatorial. In this space, we do not want to be dictatorial. We actually want to have a space where we challenge issues of dictatorialness. But also when you talk about short people, my gender consciousness comes into mind, and you know, as a psychologist, I think of the short man syndrome. So hopefully I just thought, oh, short people, you mean short men, not short women. But I do hope that those kind of stereotypes are challenged. And again, I do welcome you to this lecture called Europe at the Human Rights Crossroads, part of the Inspiring Thinker series, and another contribution to our college's transformation lecture series. I really thank you, Program Director.
As he grew up, he got involved in a number of political activities in the UK. In 1999, for example, he was elected a member of the Labour Party, who was representing the Labour Party in the European Parliament. And of course, that is an important appointment, given that the European Union, your equivalent of the African Union, is quite a significant institution. And serving in that institution, therefore, is not anybody's game. So by virtue of him having been appointed to that position means that he's somebody to be reckoned with. And then, of course, he also used his position in that parliament to defend human rights in different respects, whether in the work sector or in society at large. And I was looking at some of his appointments. To be honest, very few of us will make half of these achievements. I'll just quickly run through a few of them. He has received a Special Service Award from the American Association of Physicians for Human Rights. That was one of the accolades. And also he got an honorary doctorate from Staffordshire University in the UK for the work that was doing on human rights. That was one of many. And then, of course, in 2007, he also got another award for his work on civil liberties. And again, in 2012, he got another award. And he also received the European Diversity Lifetime Achievement Award in 2012, also for his work related to human rights. And he was awarded a CPE in the Queen's 2012 New Honours List. And then, of course, he was also, in 2014, named the Politician of the Year, not for wrong utterances, but for correct utterances. And then was given that title. And besides that, he was also honored as a life peer in the House of Lords. Those of you who know politics, especially UK politics, who know there is a House of Lords and there is another one which is a lower rank, the House of Commons. So he's in the upper one. So you can tell why. It's because of the work that he's doing. And there are a couple of other awards that he has obtained. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, I think you'll agree with me that he came at an opportune time in South African politics when we were struggling to find politicians who can do what they are appointed to do. And then he has done a sterling job in the EU, and we're hoping that from his lecture, we're going to benefit a lot. Given that we're running short of time, I will then hand over to Lord Cashman to address us. Please welcome.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. It's the nearest I've got through sitting through my own obituary. So I thank you for that. Those of you who know me know I don't really do speeches. I'm a great believer in what Shakespeare wrote, which is that we should speak what we feel and not what we ought to say, especially when it comes to the defense of human rights, civil liberties, and often the defense of the most out-of-favored, the least admired. That is absolutely when we need to speak what we feel rather than what we should say. And may I add, not in a dictatorial way, because I'm neither tall nor short, but in an adversarial way. But if I may, let me put my own experience into context. I was born in 1950 in a very poor part of London, and my father, as was said, was a dock worker, and my mother was a very proud office cleaner. And when I was born, the first thing my father did was he went down to the dock labour board to put my name down, so that when I left school at the age of 15, that I would become a docker. And if my mother had had 4 daughters instead of 4 sons, she would have taken us office cleaning with her, so that when we left school, we would do what our parents had done. And to whom you were born and where you were born dictated your future. And in some respects, sadly, it still does. But I was extremely fortunate in that at the age of 12, I was discovered at my secondary modern school, which was a school you went to if you didn't pass your exams. It was a school you went to where they would make you a bricklayer, where they would make you a labourer, where you would work in a factory. And there at this school at the age of 12, I was discovered, or rather the age of 11, I was discovered singing, you won't even know her, she's so old, she's older than me, singing songs by a brilliant black jazz singer called Eartha Kitt. And my impersonation of Eartha Kitt was so amazing at the end of term school show that there was a talent scout from the West End theatres, and within 3 months I ended up in Oliver, in the West End of London, playing Oliver in that production. earning £3 a week more than my father. And my father many years later said, "You know what?" He said, "Michael, if you hadn't gone on the stage, I think you would have ended up in prison." And then when I went into politics, he said, "You know, Michael, now you're in politics, you're even more likely to end up in prison." But what if that had been South Africa? What a prison that would have been, where people were imprisoned for giving a voice to the voiceless, giving a visibility to those who would be made invisible. People imprisoned for daring to say what they felt and not what they ought to say. And the context of human rights and civil liberties must always be placed in that generational scope. What I and others have achieved in the United Kingdom and in the European Union in terms of human rights, and especially lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex rights. Why do I say especially? Because there was a hierarchy of discrimination. And we, as a gay man, we were placed lower down. And the achievements that we have gained are not ours. They're the achievements that were started by 1,000 generations before. Women and men who had the courage to say, "No, you do not speak in my name. No, you do not represent me." And in terms of human rights, the fruit that we pick from the tree was planted and nurtured for thousands of generations. And the European Union, people believe, was born as an economic union. Not so. It was born out of the Second World War. Quite literally, the ashes of the Second World War. The ashes of people's hopes, people's dreams. The ashes from buildings that were destroyed. The ashes from the crematoriums that were dotted across Europe, where people were taken solely because they were perceived to be different. A different race, a different ethnicity, religion, trade unionists, homosexuals, Jews, taken because they were seen as a threat. They were not normal. They were not part of the culture. They were not part of the tradition, or indeed, dare I say, not part of the accepted religion. And out of the Second World War came a determination amongst those founders, those brilliant women and men, who said we would form an association where we would never again see one country pitted against another, no economy against another, no fighting over land, coal, steel, no fighting, interestingly, over natural resources. An interesting concept, even on this continent. An interesting concept then on the continent of Europe. But primarily out of that concept of a European economic community, hang on to that last word, community. Community of countries, community of individuals, came the concept of fundamental human values. And with each successive treaty revision, the individual has been placed heart and center in the legislative arena. The Treaty of Amsterdam, a brilliant step forward, because up until then, quite rightly, but only up until then, gender and nationality were given as rights that the EU could then legislate upon. But Article 13, and it's a brilliant article. Now, and I can prove how much of we call it an anorak in the United Kingdom, technocrat. It's now Article 19 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, but Article 13. It gives the European Union the legal basis to take action to combat discrimination on the following grounds: race, ethnicity, religion, belief, age, disability, sexual orientation, gender and nationality covered elsewhere. And why is it brilliant? Why is it brilliant? Because quite simply, one person can experience discrimination on each separate ground, that multiplicity of discrimination, and to do something about all of them except one is to make redundant the good work you have done, because you have reinforced the hierarchy of liberation and oppression. And we've brought forward laws on that basis. And in 2008, I'm pleased to say that I led the campaign within the Parliament so that we would widen this approach to non-discrimination. The Parliament gave its agreement that there will be no discrimination on access to goods and services within the remainder of Article 13. The member state governments have resolutely refused to introduce it. Their argument being that because of the economic crisis, we cannot afford such rights. And that is why I believe that the EU is at a human rights crossroads, for many reasons. I've talked about domestic legislative policies. But the EU is absolutely right in that what we do internally must be mirrored externally. And so all of our free trade agreements, our economic partnership agreements, contain a human rights clause. As a member of the Parliament for 15 years, I was also a member of the European Union Joint Parliamentary Assembly with the African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. And the ACP countries are clearly covered by what is called the Cotonou Agreement. Might sound very boring, but in terms of human rights, crucial, because Article 8 has a non-discrimination human rights clause, Article 96, a suspension clause. And I say this not as a visitor, not as someone lecturing, but I say this as a fellow human being. That what I see happening to my brothers and my sisters, the LGBT community in the Caribbean and on the African continent, for me is not acceptable. And so I have raised the issue of Article 8. And I was told, stared back by some of my colleagues from the ACP to be told, but sexual orientation is not a human right. LGBTI, not a human right. And I forced through a plenary discussion on this, against the wishes of my ACP colleagues, because if we are to take these views on either the erosion of human rights or the denial of human rights, then we must do so and say so publicly. And the EU backed off. It did not want that fight. In the European Union, one of the founding countries, and this is why I say as a human being, one of the founding countries, Italy, there is still not equality for LGBTI people. So we have problems internally. But I always have to imagine, what if that were me? What if that were me, experiencing discrimination on the grounds of race, or ethnicity, or religion, or belief, or gender, or sexual orientation, or nationality? Would it be okay for me to experience that discrimination? And if not, how dare I expect it to be right for somebody else? The universality of human rights does not stop at any man-made border or barrier. It is universal. And in Europe, because of the economic crisis, a very worrying Fundamental Rights Agency report of some 2 years ago talked of increasing and worrying levels of racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. And why? Because it's like the 1930s all over again. When they came for the Jews, as Pastor Niemöller said, I was not a Jew, so I did not speak out. When they came for the gypsies, I was not a gypsy, so I did not speak out. And it is that same approach, looking for the scapegoat, looking for the person who has caused your problems. And that is why Europe must now double up its efforts, must be much stronger in its defense of human rights and civil liberties internally as well as externally. We must use the same language, otherwise we are hypocrites and neo-colonialists. And it's worthwhile saying, actually, that in terms of the experiences of LGBTI people, and yes, women, on some continents, and including the continent of Africa, most of it occurred because the colonizers brought in not only their repressive laws, but their religions too. And I'm saddened to say that in the European Union and in the United Kingdom, on our defense of women's rights, and in our defense and promotion of LGBTI rights, religious organizations still want to stop us, still want to block us. And that is why, as a born-again atheist, as a gay man, I need absolutely to defend the right of religious belief, of faith, or of no belief. And why? Because if I don't defend the rights of the other, how on earth can I expect the hand of the other to come out and lift me up and defend me? We are all in this together. And so I come to apologize for the practices and the ways that we enforced upon others that are now being forced on others who are seen to be worthy or unworthy of rights. But I also come to say that we are in this together, and the solution to these problems can only be African. Culture never stands still. Tradition should be used as inclusive in order to embrace. I was once told in the United Kingdom during a public debate on the BBC that I was a threat to the family. I was not from the traditional family. And I said, but I am the son of an ordinary man and an ordinary woman. And you have made me extraordinary by denying me equality. We are all of the family. And we are mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters. And once we take that notion of tradition and include and uplift people, then tradition and culture have a future. When we use it to deny, that is when those very traditions and cultures become weak and vulnerable. And so I believe that the European Union, with some member states, and I will finish on this because it's important to hear your views, with some member states saying that we do not need a union like the United Kingdom, that we need to get rid of a single set of rules, that we don't need basic fundamental rights across Europe, just in our countries. That weakens a union, and it weakens the concept and the defense of human rights across the globe. Equally with the African Union together can bring solutions where perhaps solutions might not readily appear. If we accept the premise for me that we are global citizens and that our freedom of movement means that our rights should not be diminished. And I'll finish with this thought. It's very easy to stand up in politics and in public life to say what is popular. The most important thing is to stand up, as I said earlier, and give a voice to the voiceless, to represent the unpopular, the defamed, the misrepresented. We do that by association and by working with them, and in my instance, by declaring who you are. And only when we do that, I believe, can we then walk in the footsteps, never in the shoes, but walk in the footsteps of Madiba. Thank you.
When Lord Cashman started off his presentation, he made reference to a statement which can be easily linked to Steve Biko. He says we should speak what we feel and not what we ought to say. Steve Biko wrote a book, I Write What I Like. So there is some relevance taking place there. So basically we can compare and contrast, but at the end of the day, I am of the opinion that we have each benefited. And as he was making his presentation, I'm sure you noted down some points, and then of course you are ready with comments and questions.
Thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation. The question I have for you is, what is your take on reparations insofar as the whole issue is concerned, because there happens to be consensus that Africans in this continent had a road deal from Western countries who were plundering this continent for gain. How do you feel about the fact that there should be a move towards compensating those who suffered a lot, as well as apologies where necessary? Thank you very much.
I wanted to tell you that at the moment at a sister university, it's called the Durban Institute of Technology, there is a production of Oliver, if you would like to see it. And I can assure you they're very good. My concern, in addition to the issues you've raised, is the way migrants and those who are termed illegal migrants are treated.
My question is the European Union willing to hold or withhold funding to Uganda if they continue on with legislation that persecutes gays and lesbians? Thank you.
On the withholding of funding,